The BRICS alliance, often brushed off by the West as a minor player in global politics, might just be the biggest threat to the US-led world order. Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa have quietly built an economic powerhouse that now surpasses the G7 in global wealth. While the G7 clings to its influence, BRICS is proving it's no sideshow. It's a rising force that could reshape the balance of power on the world stage. Could this be the start of a new world order? BRICS, after expanding last year, has grown to include more countries, and it's showing signs of becoming a serious competitor on the global stage. Combined, these countries represent a population 5 times greater than that of the G7 nations, and they're already attracting interest from 40 other countries wanting to join. This new dynamic is testing the status quo, as the US and its allies grapple with the rise of this emerging economic bloc. While some critics argue that BRICS doesn't yet have the power to directly challenge American global dominance, the fact that it's gaining traction and support from other countries shows that it's more than just an illusion. At the core of the BRICS alliance is the shared desire for economic growth and development. These nations, many of which are still in a state of underdevelopment compared to Western powers, are striving for a higher standard of living. They reject the notion that they should accept second-class status on the global stage. Historically, the US and its G7 partners have kept these countries in check, either through colonialism or economic restrictions. The BRICS nations are united in their belief that they should have the freedom to grow and prosper without being stifled by the global economic system led by the US. One of the key aspects of this power shift is the challenge to the US dollar's dominance in global trade. The dollar has been the world's reserve currency since the end of World War II, and it's not going to be dethroned overnight. But the growing interest in alternative currencies, such as the Chinese yuan and the Russian ruble, is starting to shake things up. The BRICS nations have discussed creating a shared currency basket, which could reduce their reliance on the dollar in international trade. However, it's not a simple task. The dollar's primacy is deeply entrenched, and its dominance is rooted in the unique position the US found itself in after World War II. When the war ended, the US was one of the few countries that had emerged relatively unscathed, while much of the rest of the world lay in ruins. With its economy intact and in need of rebuilding, the US became the dominant player in the global economy. For countries to conduct trade, they needed to use the dollar, which was seen as the only stable currency. This situation has persisted for decades, with the dollar remaining the global standard for reserves and international transactions. For many countries, it's simply easier to conduct business in dollars, and as a result, the US has enjoyed the luxury of getting goods from other countries in exchange for paper money that costs almost nothing to produce. This arrangement has given the US immense economic power. It has allowed the country to receive goods and services without offering much in return, except for its own paper currency. It's an extraordinary privilege that many other nations would like to participate in. However, the BRICS nations are beginning to question why they should continue to rely on the dollar, and they are looking for ways to reduce their dependence on it. The relationship between the US and China adds another layer to this global power struggle. While the G7 remains dominated by the US, the BRICS alliance is increasingly shaped by China's growing influence. China is now the dominant economic power within the BRICS, and it has surpassed other members like Russia and India in terms of GDP. While Russia still plays an important role within the group, it is clear that China is the driving force behind the alliance's growing economic clout. As China continues to rise, it poses a direct challenge to the U.S. long-standing economic and geopolitical dominance. China's rapid rise is striking. Just 50 years ago, it was one of the poorest countries in the world. Today, it is the second largest economy globally and is projected to surpass the US by the end of this decade. This shift in the global economic landscape has made it difficult for the US and its allies to maintain the same level of influence they once had. For the first time in a century, the US faces a real economic competitor in China, which is reshaping the balance of power in the global economy. While the US is still the dominant force within the G7, the rise of China has made it clear that the global order is changing. The BRICS nations under China's leadership represent a growing challenge to the U.S position at the top of the global hierarchy. The question now is whether this shift will lead to a new world order, where the US no longer calls the shots, or if the current system will adapt to accommodate the rising powers of the BRICS. The situation within the US itself adds another layer of complexity. While the economy may be experiencing a period of growth, with a strong stock market and low unemployment rates, there is a growing sense of unease among the American public. The wealth gap has widened dramatically in recent decades, and many Americans feel left behind by the current system. The top 10% of the population owns the vast majority of stocks, leaving the other 90% to watch from the sidelines as the rich continue to accumulate wealth. This inequality is contributing to the rise of populist movements within the US, as many people feel that the economic system is rigged against them. The US elections were a critical moment in the ongoing debate about the future of the country's role in the world. And now that the powers reigning in the United States changed, we might see a shift in their politics, with the United States allying themselves with the BRICS members more. The situation in the Middle East seems to be mirroring the growing discontent seen globally, particularly with the actions of BRICS nations. This discontent has become a backdrop for wider geopolitical shifts, and it's challenging to pinpoint exactly when these shifts will tip over into something more significant. While it's difficult to predict when the infrastructure of established powers will crumble, it's clear that change is underway, especially as new powers and alliances emerge. This sense of inevitable change isn't just about the BRICS nations. It's part of a larger global narrative of dissatisfaction with the status quo. The conversation always seems to circle back to the United States' role in global affairs, especially in volatile regions like the Middle East. The country's involvement has traditionally been a balancing act, trying to maintain its dominance while dealing with the complexity of the region. But this is where the challenge lies. The United States' dominance, much like any empire, is slowly waning. No empire ever lasts forever, and as the US grapples with its declining influence, it's faced with the uncomfortable reality that its position is no longer as unassailable as it once was. The remnants of this empire, like its sprawling military presence around the globe, boasting 700, 800 military bases, are stark reminders of how far the reach used to extend. Yet, even these symbols of power are not immune to the inevitable decline that all empires face. This isn't a new story. If history teaches anything, it's that power shifts over time. Just like the British Empire, which saw its imperial power dissolve over the last century, the United States finds itself at a crossroads, struggling to hold on to its former glory. The desire to maintain a grip on allies like Israel, or to influence the course of events in places like Ukraine, only highlights the difficulty in accepting the limits of the US. We've seen this before. The bitter lessons of history often confront uncomfortable truths, and this one cuts deep. The US has repeatedly failed to achieve its goals in some of its most significant conflicts. They lost the war in Vietnam. Today, it's governed by the Communist Party. They lost the war in Afghanistan. The Taliban is back in control. They lost in Iraq too, despite years of effort and resources poured into these conflicts. The takeaway? Even with all its power, the US has limits. What are your thoughts? Let us know in the comments below.